What's up, everybody, and welcome. In this episode, I'm going to show you how I installed this set of RX8 seats into my FC. Now, it's pretty hot in this car, smelly, and the neighbors are doing some yard work, so I'm going to go inside where it's more comfortable, and let's talk. Much better. Now, I'm going to get this video up and loaded, and we'll go over how I installed those seats into my FC. If you have noticed, this old RX7 seat that was in the passenger side is now my office chair, and I'm going to make another video about how I did that. Anyways, let's get into it. Alright, first things first before we get started, this is not going to be an easy job. It's definitely going to take at least a full weekend, and you're going to need a fair bit of tools. There's going to be a lot of drilling, a lot of grinding, some painting and whatnot to get this done. So this video is just to act as a reference of how I installed the RX8 seats into my FC. Please do so at your own risk. And when you're doing this job, make sure you have some proper PPE. Make sure you have something to protect your eyes, some kind of goggles, a mask. I mean, this is the middle of COVID, so everybody should have a mask to protect themselves from all these particles. You definitely want some gloves to wear. And because there's going to be a lot of grinding, it's going to get loud. Make sure you have some earplugs. With all that being said, let's finally get into the meat and potatoes of this video. I got my pair of RX8 seats from the pick and pull for about $90. These seats came from a first gen RX8, so they're fully manual, which is exactly what I wanted. But there may be some differences if you do find an electronic version of the seats. I can't say exactly what those differences will be. Now, what I will be doing is I'll be utilizing these old corbel brackets. But this will also require some modification to work. But it's perfect because it has all the mounting points already that I need. I just need to slightly modify this seat itself to mount to this. I didn't want to ruin these seats, so I completely removed the upholstery from the frame itself, along with the airbag and any electrical wiring that I didn't need. And I stripped it down to the bare frame you see here. I'll be making a separate video on the complete RX8 seat disassembly, since some people are not interested in mounting these seats into the FC. They would be interested in how to disassemble them for whatever custom application they have. With the seat fully disassembled, here comes the hardest part of the project. The RX8 rails are going to stay onto the seat. We want to keep those. However, the bottom of the rails have all of the RX8 mounts and pedestals like you see here. We need all of those to be gone and have the rails completely flat to mount onto the Corbeau mount. That's a lot of mounts. Now, instead of just taking the grinder and going all the way through these, what I'm going to do is these are riveted on. Here's the other end of the rivet. All I'm going to do is cut the heads off these rivets so I can pull this straight up. And then we'll pound the other end out with a hammer and it'll just fall right out through the rail. So I'm going to grind the heads of these off and then this will just come right off. For this one, these are welded on. This entire diameter is not welded. It's just the diameter of this pin here. So what I'm going to do is just concentrate my grinding on the center area here where the weld is. The rest of this will just fall right off. These ones up here are spot welded on the sides. This one and then this one over here. Now, if you have a spot weld drill bit, it's real easy. You can just drill them out. Unfortunately, mine broke halfway through this. I'll save you all the trouble of watching me struggle to get all of these mounts off. Just know it takes a lot of grinding, drilling, hammering, pulling, and yanking at this thing to get all these mounts off. That leaves us with some seat rails that are smooth as a baby's behind. And then I got myself here a 3-inch wide piece of plate steel because the RX8 sliders are much wider than the Corbeau mount. So you see the Corbeau mount doesn't actually go all the way across to meet the sliders here. So what I'm going to do is put the mount inside of the car and then I'm going to align these sliders and see what's the best position for it to be. All the way over like this or somewhere in the middle, and then use the steel that I have here to fill the gaps in between. This part takes a little patience, but on the passenger side, I ended up putting it somewhere in the middle where I have the plate on both sides of the Corbeau mount. So here's my mounting setup. A couple notes. If I had enough of this plate of steel, I would have just made it all the way across. I didn't, but that's okay. I'm not too worried about rigidity here because we have this nice L bracket and then this one here. So I have a lot of rigidity on this little piece. And what you don't see under here is there is an L with these brackets here. That gives me some more rigidity. So that part's okay. You may also notice I cut the rear bar of the Corbeau mount out. I had to do that on the driver's side, and you have to do it on the passenger side. The reason being is the seat pan, when you want to slide back, will hit that bar. Was I had to cut some of the bolts shorter that are going to mount here because the clearance between this part and the floor is really tight. So I had to cut these bolts exactly to the right length. Now, before we go mounting this into the car, I only drilled one hole so far for the sliders on the seat. This is going to be my datum point because I want to make sure that the seat is going to face the right direction and not be crooked. Here you can see I have the Corbeau mount mounted onto the passenger side of the floor, and I have the seat on top with the one bolt in as my data point. And I'm finessing it so that it's in the right position so the seat is facing straight. And until I get it to a point where I like it, then I'll make my mark and go ahead and drill a hole. Before I drilled the holes in the rear, I went ahead and put the seat pan back into the seat itself and did a quick test fit to see how well it moves front and back and to make sure it's pointing in the right direction. I also went ahead and sat inside and just make sure it was comfortable and everything aligned as I expected it to be. With the seat where I wanted, I went ahead and drilled the other two holes in the back. After that, I decided to take off the plates, clean them, prep them so I can give them a coat of paint so they don't rust for the time being. With the parts painted, I went ahead and reassembled them back onto the Corbeau mount. I also attached the seat back to the mount along with the upholstery and trim parts. However, there's a bunch of nuances about this setup that I want to highlight for you guys in both the passenger and driver side. I've been just showing the passenger side for now, but I'm going to show you a bunch of pictures and videos here on the nuances of both. It's funny because half of this project is just getting the seat rails smooth like you see here. If only there was a way to do it without all the grinding. Anyways, we're back to the finished product looking underneath the seat. Here you can see the Corbeau mount with my adapter plates or extension plates, whatever you want to call them. Because I don't have a welder or know how to weld for that fact, I just simply bolted these plates onto the Corbeau mount. However, now that I have everything mocked up, what I plan on doing is taking it to someone who can actually weld these plates in place because I don't want to have all those extra bolts that don't need to be there. And some of them get in the way with the floor pan because clearance is really tight along the transmission tunnel. However, regardless if you weld your own plates or not, you're going to need some special bolts that go inside the RX8 seat rail because this is where the bolt goes when you mount it onto the frame. Now, what I have here are these rounded hex bolts like you see here. Those low profile heads are small enough so that they still fit within the sliders. It's roughly the same size as what the original rivet was beforehand. So that's going to be one of your design constraints when you're working with this here. You're going to need those bolts to be able to fit within the slider so that you don't lose your functionality. The other headache has to do with the length of the RX8 seat rails. They're much longer than the RX7. That's because the RX8 actually had 4 doors and rear seats that could fit an adult, not a child with no legs. It has a slight overhang like you see in the picture here, and it makes getting access to that bolt really difficult. I have to use a ratcheting wrench in order to get in there and get the bolt on. Alright, now let's talk about the headaches on the driver's side. Here you can see the seat fully prepped to be installed onto the Corbeau mounts. And here we can see the adapter plate on the Corbeau mount. That sticker you see there actually faces towards the back of the car. The adapter plate is on the side closest to the door. So on the other side, I didn't need any adapter plate at all because the rail lines up perfectly with the right side of the Corbeau mount. The problem on the driver's side, however, are the height of those bolts I used initially were too tall. They interfered with the mechanism used to raise and lower the bottom of the seat pan. Because the driver's side, you can actually not only slide back and forward, but you actually can raise it up and lower it down depending on how tall you are. I'm not sure if you can see it in the picture here, but trust me, there is interference. So to counteract that, I use the same style of bolts that I use inside the seat rail. I went ahead and got those hex bolts that have the rounded caps and they're much lower profile. This made it so that the mechanism clears over the head bolt without interfering, and I can still get full functionality of the seat. And like I mentioned on the passenger side, I had to cut the rear crossbar of the Corbeau mount so that I can slide the seat back to a comfortable position. I don't have a picture of it in the construction phase, but you can see it when the seat is installed here. With all those headaches out of the way, let's talk about the fit and finish of these seats for both the passenger and driver side. So here's a test fit with me getting inside the passenger seat. I'm 5'11", although I'm quite skinny. But check out my hip point and then also look at the lever arm to recline the seats. That arm is about right at the height of the door sill. Keep that in mind when we go visit the driver's side. Now, as always, any seat in the FC on the passenger side is always a little higher than the driver's seat, but the height of the seat pan is about the same as the stock FC seat was, so I'm very happy with that result. However, one thing to keep in mind is the seat back is much taller on the RX8 seat compared to the FC seat. We'll get to that in a second, but here you can see I have full functionality in terms of sliding all the way forward and all the way back. Here's a glimpse of what my head looks like above the door seal. Okay, please ignore the camera not focusing, but you get an idea of it from this low angle. Because the seat back is so much taller on the RX8 seats than the FC, on the passenger side, there is such a small amount of interference with the sun visor like you see here. If I slide it back and then recline it forward, it's not a problem, it doesn't hit, but depending on how far forward you have that seat, you might have a little interference like you see. Here's a look at the finished product of the mount and the seat rails out back. As I mentioned, these rails are much longer than the FC, so there is a slight overhang, but you don't see these too much when you have the seat in the middle and reclined where it should be. Here's a look underneath the passenger seat from the front. As you can see on the side closest to the door, there's a ton of space underneath, so you don't actually have to cut the bolts down to size. But on the side of the transmission tunnel, we're basically touching the carpet. That's how tight it is. Okay, now moving on to the driver's side. Here's what I look like inside the seat, and I have full functionality of sliding the seat all the way back and all the way forward. I can raise and lower the height of the seat pan to whatever I find is comfortable. I'm a little taller, so I typically like to have it as low as possible, or just a few ticks above. Now, remember what I said about the handle for the recliner on the passenger side? Look at it on this side of the driver's seat. You can't even see it because it's tucked below the door sill. That's how much of a difference there is when it comes to the driver and passenger seat heights. Here's the passenger side once again, and comparing it to the driver's side. Now, looking at the passenger side, in my honest opinion, I am not uncomfortable here, and I'm a taller driver. This is a slight nuance. I would say if you recline the seat back just a little bit, and it's very comfortable. With regards to the driver's seat back height, there is no interference with the sun visor. We're all good here. Taking a look out back, here's a glimpse of the sliders and the rear mounts on the floor. And then in the front underneath. Just like with the passenger side, we have no clearance issues on the side closest to the door, but it's really tight when you get along the transmission tunnel. Well, folks, I think I have exhausted you in this video and all the information I know about installing RX8 seats into an FC. And I nearly exhausted my voice. The last little icing on the cake for this job was I decided to paint the little rotor shape housing in the seat black instead of silver because there's nothing silver in my FC interior. And I gotta admit, I am 100% happy with the outcome of having these seats in the FC. They are the perfect pair of street seats to have in this car. I will still keep my Corbeaus, and I'll still have a racing seat for those days I want to take it to the track. But this is the perfect addition to have as a weekend cruiser. So I hope you all found this video helpful, informational, educational. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to ask in the comments down below, or you can find me on Instagram at rotary_night. Thank you all for watching. Adios.